Wouldn't it be nice if the government were run scientifically, where the outcomes of each new policy were measured and tracked to see if the policy produced the desired results, and where those results were used to further improve the system? That'd be way better than having to deal with a bloated bureaucracy that only implements what moneyed interests want, thus leading to nothing but frustration, bitterness, anger, and a general sense of distrust. What if the government anticipated what was important to us and implemented those things so we never actually needed to protest except in dire circumstances? What if the government learned all about our needs and responded to them instead of attempting to suppress them or making it so that only some people get their needs met, sometimes at the expense of others? I mean, we have the knowledge and the technology. It's completely possible. But we just don't live in that world yet. Yet. But we could, and it's been done before. Let's talk about what running a country scientifically looks like. It's not as complicated as you think. But before I get started, let's go over what it means to build systems scientifically. What do you know about creating complex systems that humans have to interact with? I'm glad you asked. I have a master's degree in human factors and ergonomics, which is the scientific study of improving systems that humans interact with. And a lot of human factors and usability principles, if not all, could be applied to creating a system of government. According to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, human factors is concerned with the application of what we know about people, their abilities, characteristics, and limitations to the design of equipment they use, environments in which they function, and jobs they perform. Environments in which they function, such as within the context of society in general, perhaps? Basically, human factors is all about making systems usable by adhering to usability principles and constantly testing and iterating on your system to optimize the user experience. There's hair stuck in my lip gloss. And it's cat hair. According to the Nielsen Norman Group, who are giants in the world of usability, human factors, and user experience, usability is defined by the following 5 components. Learnability. How easy is it for users to accomplish basic tasks the first time they encounter the design? Efficiency. Once users have learned the design, how quickly can they perform tasks? Memorability. When users return to the design after a period of not using it, how easily can they reestablish proficiency? Errors. How many errors do users make? How severe are these errors? And how easily can they recover from the errors? Satisfaction. How pleasant is it to use the design? Another commonly used example of usability principles are Jacob Nielsen's, of the aforementioned Nielsen Norman Group, 10 usability heuristic that every human factors and usability expert knows and loves. And these are 1. Visibility of system status, which means the system gives you real-time feedback on what it is you're doing. 2. Match between system and the real world. The system speaks the user's language and fits their mental model. 3. User control and freedom. Users have an emergency exit to leave an unwanted action. 4. Consistency and standards. Internal consistency, like words having the same meaning throughout a system, and external consistency with other similar systems. 5. Error prevention. Elimination of conditions that lead to errors. 6. Recognition rather than recall. Reducing cognitive load by making elements, actions, and options visible. 7. Flexibility and efficiency of use. Shortcuts for frequent actions. 8. Aesthetic and minimalist design. This is self-explanatory, but it means no relevant information and make it cute. 9. Help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors, which means error messages in plain text that outline the problem and suggest a solution. 10, the last one, is help and documentation, which means providing documentation to show users how to complete tasks, although ideally the interface will guide the user without additional documentation. In addition to heuristics, there's also a whole bunch of user experience laws like Miller's Law that states that users of a system are only able to hold 7 plus or minus 2 items in their head at a time, or Jacob's Law, Fitts Law, Hicks Law, Gestalt principles, so many other laws that are widely recognized and accepted as important to usability. If you want to learn more about these, links will be in the description box down below. And we could use user experience laws and heuristics like these to design a government system that has a sense of efficiency, familiarity, control, and error management, for example. This is totally a thing that can be done because we can predictably tell what the sticky points in a system are or will be by conducting a heuristic evaluation or straight up testing how people interact with the system in a scientific manner. And this is a skill set that can be learned. I know because I have learned it and I use it all the time. I'm basically a professional hater. User research, in which you test how effectively someone can interact with the system, is a thing that exists, and tech companies use it to improve the software and hardware products that you use. A major component of conducting user research is empathizing with the user, understanding their perspective, and acknowledging that all faults lie within the system itself rather than with the user. Because if it was a good system, the user wouldn't be confused. There's several methodologies for user testing, but usability testing is one of the most common ones. In usability testing, you give the user a set of tasks to complete within the constraints of the system, be it an app, a hardware device, or what have you. You can ask open-ended questions like, what did you think of the process? And record qualitative metrics such as users' thoughts about the process. or measure quantitative metrics like time on task or clicks required to complete task if it's an app or a website, for example. Big companies especially can afford to do this because they have a lot of money and resources. You know who else has a lot of money and resources? The government. They just don't use it well at all because it goes to sending money to Ukraine so they can use Ukrainians as cannon fodder for a proxy war against Russia, or to the Zionist occupation so they can keep committing a genocide of the indigenous Palestinian population so they can take over their land and use it to build the Ben Gurion Canal and apparently also a port, probably for oil exploration vessels or something. Ugh. But there's a reason that corporations can create apps that tickle your brain and get you to stick on them because they're so easy to use and so addictive. This is a design choice that is based on usability principles and an understanding of human psychology and validated by research. And just as things can be designed to be addictive and lead you to doom scrolling for hours, they can also be designed to be easy and simple and nice to use. This applies to any system. One of the main aspects of human factors involves designing systems that mitigate user error and make it very clear what the status of the system is and how to properly interact with that system, because in some cases, the outcome of a badly designed system is loss of human life or other disasters. One major example of bad design leading to disaster is the 3 Mile Island partial nuclear meltdown that happened because, at least according to some sources, the interface showing the state of the valve in the reactor's control system was confusing and made it unclear whether the valve was open or not, which led to gradual loss of coolant and led to a partial meltdown because everyone thought it was closed when it was actually opened and leaking large amounts of water. Luckily, there were no injuries or deaths as a result of this disaster, but obviously, a partial nuclear meltdown that led to a stunting of nuclear energy initiatives across the country isn't really great. It's not really a good result. The Challenger explosion, which killed 7 astronauts 73 seconds after liftoff, was also the result of poor human factors and of valuing profit over human life. No surprise there, because engineers knew ahead of time that there was an issue with an O-ring sealing at low temperatures. But it would have cost money and time to fix that, so the people in charge went ahead with the launch anyway. And obviously, people died. And that's the cost of systems with design flaws, and of not listening to experts, and of valuing profit over human life. But how does this apply to the government, you may ask? Anything that a person has to interact with that the government creates, like, for example, food stamps, unemployment, and immigration procedures, healthcare in countries where the government funds healthcare, and so on, is a system that somebody designed. Just like the Challenger or a nuclear reactor. It's more incorporeal and less physical, less tangible, but it's a system nonetheless. And people interact with it. Somebody decides what the procedures are, what the steps are within those procedures, and how this procedure being done correctly is verified, timelines for how long a procedure can take on the side of the government, and so on. If you take anything away from this video, let it be that systems are made by people and don't have to be set in stone. We can scientifically test them to see if they're performing as intended, and if they're not, we can fix them. Though sometimes systems are really bad and you need to completely start over because attempting to fix it is going to make your life as the designer of said system harder, and it's going to make the life of the person interacting with it harder. Everyone's just going to have a bad time. Also, just like with the Challenger explosion, where the output of a system with a design flaw was loss of human life, the output of badly designed social, economic, or political structures is also loss of human life. This is called social murder, a term originally coined by my boy Friedrich Engels, where the circumstances of one's oppression can lead to an unnatural perishing, which can be things like an inability to access certain necessary resources, exposure to pathogens or toxic chemicals that you didn't need to be exposed to, trauma from the aforementioned things that leads to mental and physical disability, and so on, and which can lead to an unnatural unaliving or just so much stress that it leads to a complete breakdown of your physical and mental well-being. Bad government systems output social murder. Creating a system that naturally outputs poverty and homelessness is a choice, and the people impacted by the choice to the point of death are victims of social murder. So when I talk about running a country scientifically, I mean literally using the scientific method in which you formulate and test a hypothesis to see if the system output is what you wanted. And the system I want would be one that minimizes or completely eradicates social murder so that no human life is lost, especially not for the sake of maximizing profits. Running a country scientifically would involve using human factors and usability principles in order to establish systems that are easy to learn and memorize, limit user error, maximize efficiency, and meet the needs of everyone that interacts with the system. In user experience in the corporate tech world, the jargon is being delightful. And yes, I want the government to be delightful to interact with. Wouldn't that be nice? If Google can give us access to all sorts of information, if Amazon can have one-day shipping, if Walmart can centrally plan their entire company, read People's Republic of Walmart to learn more. If the TikTok and YouTube algorithms can literally predict exactly what we want to see based on what else we've already watched, if ChatGPT can output natural language answers to our questions, and if all of them are designed to be easy to use, although I kind of hate some aspects of ChatGPT's UI, not gonna lie, then yeah, we have the technology to make the government run as smoothly as any privatized solution. We just don't fund a lot of these potentially life-saving or life-improving solutions in the US or the other capitalist countries, really, but I'm in the US, so that's what I'm talking about. Like high-quality universal healthcare, a robust social safety net, maternity leave for like a year at least. Make that parental leave. Both parents should be able to stay home with their kids. Guaranteed leisure time for everyone, access to healthy food for everyone, and so on, despite the fact that we have the money for all of that. But this is not something that can be done as long as there is a profit motive in place. The need for businesses to earn a profit and even keep increasing their profits over time in order to stay open, as is required under capitalism. A lot of things that benefit people on a large scale, like free education, free healthcare, free public transportation, robust social safety nets, and so on, are not immediately profitable and therefore rarely get prioritized in nations where private individuals are in charge of how our workplaces are set up, i.e., under capitalism, the private ownership of the means of production. Of course, there's capitalist nations out there that have some of those things, but not the US. In the US, we don't even have universal healthcare, despite the fact that it would actually save money. The profit motive is a fundamental concept in capitalism and kind of prevents a lot of really cool stuff from being done, simply because it's not going to make a private individual money. Like, we have the technology and knowledge and resources to do a lot of cool things, like creating bionic limbs for amputees or exoskeletons for paraplegics, or giving advanced assistive speech technology like what Stephen Hawking had to non-vocal people and distributing those things to all people who would benefit from them and want them. But if that's not going to make someone money, then what's the point? It's not going to happen. Of course, all my examples include disabled people because disabled people are one of the groups that gets the most harmed by the fact that our worth under capitalism is determined by how much shareholder value we can produce. It's awful. Really good example of the profit motive restricting human well-being is how, when COVID started, unemployment payments had an extra $300 tacked on top of the normal unemployment payments. And a lot of people finally felt financially secure for like the first time ever. And then there was also the child tax credit, which significantly reduced child poverty. But those quickly got taken away because, well, get back to work and stop asking questions. COVID's over, okay? I mean, the wastewater data shows that it's still very much around and everyone's sick with some virus and no one knows what it is because all our outdated COVID tests don't test for new variants and PCRs aren't free and readily available anymore. But stop asking questions. Get back to work. Also, vaccines are no longer free if you're uninsured. So if you're poor, I guess you can just be a victim of social murder. Also, remote work is over now. We're all going back to the office because otherwise we're paying for an empty office and losing potential profits. Wow, look at all these things that no one wants, but that we have no choice but to deal with because profit. Because it's just not profitable for people to work from home. And that all stems from valuing profit over human lives, kind of like with the Challenger explosion. But if there is no profit motive, if workers are in charge of their workplaces and run them democratically, and if the government runs in the interests of the regular working class people rather than in the interests of the rich people currently in charge of everything, and if the government consists primarily of regular working class people, then, well, that's when you can have actual democracy and people can run society in their interests. This is called socialism. Only under socialism could we actually uncover people's needs and pain points and determine how to build a society that works for the people. And most of the time, if you listen, people can explain their problems pretty well. They may not always know exactly what they need to fix the problems, but it's the jobs of the people who are trained to come up with solutions to these problems to figure out what is feasible and desirable to the end users of the system. And it can be done. If it can be done in the corporate world, it can be done on a much larger scale at the government level. I wanted to go over a particular case of socialism working beautifully in the interests of the people, spearheaded by the youngest Bulgarian anti-fascist partisan turned agronomist turned political figure, Elena Lagadinova. She fought the Nazis as a kid during World War II, received a PhD in agrobiology, developed a new type of wheat. Oh, and she completely changed the lives of Bulgarian women for the better under its socialist system, using her scientific knowledge to make it happen. Scientifically. And if Bulgarian socialism traumatized your family, I'm really sorry about that. Your feelings about your trauma are valid, and I hope you heal from your generational trauma. And I hope once you do, you'll join us on this journey of building a better world and ensuring that the thing that traumatized your family isn't recreated in this better world. We can make future systems even better than this one and the ones that came before. That's why we look to what came before us to figure out how to improve on it, you know? Unless your family was literally like fascists or like fascist sympathizers, and then like, I don't care. Like, if you're not one yourself, but you can see the humanity in your family, that's nice, and I'm glad, but
Nancy ain't got no humanity.
But anyway, you know how earlier we talked about how you can literally do research to figure out what problems people are having in a scientific and systematic way, and then create solutions to those problems? Elena Lagadinova did just that before human factors or usability was even a thing. The reason she went from being a scientist to a politician was because she was frustrated by the bureaucratic process imposed on scientists by the USSR. So she literally wrote a letter to Brezhnev to point out the faults with the way that socialist countries conducted and disseminated scientific research, and the fact that this was getting in the way of her own research. This letter got intercepted by Bulgaria's leader, Todor Zhivkov, who saw that she was a principled communist who wanted to improve the system. He also already knew about her partisan past because at that point she was a national hero known as the Amazon for her contributions as a partisan during World War II. So in 1968, he gave her a position as a secretary of the Fatherland Front and made her the new president of the Women's Committee in Bulgaria in the hopes of solving Bulgaria's demographic crisis. Women had full equality to men in the Bulgarian constitution, but the birth rate was still steadily declining, and you kind of need people to have a society. So Zhivkov wanted Lagadinova on board to solve this problem. So remember how one of the major components of successful user research is empathizing with your users? The first thing Elena Lagadinova did in her new role was get pregnant with the intent to be a good role model, but I'm sure that definitely helped her empathize with the particular demographic that she was going to be studying. Though she already had 2 kids at that point, I feel like there's nothing quite like being pregnant to remind you of the problems faced by pregnant people. And then she created a scientific study to figure out why women weren't having kids. If I was going to solve this problem, I was going to solve it scientifically. When I started, I knew nothing about women's problems. We had to collect data. I worked together with the editorial board of the Women Today, the Central Statistical Agency, and some of the research institutes to create an anonymous survey. In the end, we received over 16,000 responses from working women. It was the first survey of its kind in Bulgaria. Elena Lagadinova from Kristen Gotzi's The Left Side of History. I honestly wish I could find a copy of the survey somewhere because survey design is like a whole thing, and I'm really curious. But anyway, rather than making assumptions that could have been potentially wrong, or advocating for a ban on abortion like what Romania did to tackle their demographic crisis, which is always a horrible idea and typically leads to terrible things like increased mortality and more orphans. Lagadinova, instead, literally asked the women of Bulgaria what their problems were directly so she could find ways to solve them on a large scale. Lagadinova found that a major factor keeping women from having kids was that despite having full legal equality with men, women were still expected to work a second shift doing domestic labor after they got home from work. And having a kid on top of that would just be too much. Women also did most of the shopping for their households and often spent a long time waiting in line for goods, because this was back in the days of bread lines and stuff. They did most of the cooking and cleaning, which is already exhausting when you work 40 hours a week. And they did have a 40-hour-a-week maximum in Eastern European socialist countries, in most of them. A lot of these women wanted kids, but they didn't feel like they had time for them. You also have to remember that a lot of Eastern European countries were pretty patriarchal prior to socialism, which wasn't limited to just Eastern Europe, obviously, but men hadn't caught up with their share of housework at that point, given that the People's Republic of Bulgaria had only been around since 1944, and it was only 1968, so that's only 24 years later. So, of course, a lot of men were raised thinking that it was the woman's job to do the domestic work, because up until very recently, that was the social norm that people were taught and grew up believing. Lagadinova's proposed solution to all these issues was to collectivize a lot of women's invisible domestic labor by establishing more nurseries and kindergartens, changing the setup of supermarkets from a typical Eastern European style where goods were distributed by one person behind a counter to a Western-style self-service supermarket. No more bread lines, yay! Making it easier for workers to get ready-made meals so that the burden of cooking wasn't placed entirely on women, establishing more after-school clubs and activities for elementary and middle school students, and re-educating men to challenge stereotypes about women's work. Also, like, imagine if you could get a ready-made meal for like $2 because it was subsidized by the government. Like, that alone would be amazing and life-changing for so many people, right? I'd love that. After 5 years, the Women's Committee's policy proposals were codified in the 1973 Politburo decision called Enhancing the Role of Women in the Building of a Developed Socialist Society, which made Bulgaria's social system one of the most progressive in the world and allowed the Women's Committee the power to hold employers and state agencies accountable to these new laws. These new policies that Lagadinova helped bring about, including the elevation of the right to maternity leave as a constitutional principle in the newly rewritten constitution in 1971, rapidly changed the lives of many Bulgarian women for the better. Unfortunately, the collapse of Eastern European socialism 20 years later in 1991 led to Elena Lagadinova's early retirement at the age of 60. And thanks to capitalist shock therapy, the birth rate of Bulgaria dropped again and then never recovered, and the population has been steadily declining ever since. But hey, being a NATO country is great, right? Free market! Yeah! We did it, guys! We stopped communism! It's over now. We're happy. Right? Right? Freedom! A lot of what Elena Lagadinova accomplished was undone with Bulgaria turning to capitalism, though it still has policies like 410 days of paid maternity leave and 20 days of paid vacation left over from the socialist days. But Lagadinova never stopped believing that a better future is possible. In Red Valkyries by Kristen Godsey, Godsey says that when she last met with Lagadinova and expressed wanting to leave the US, Lagadinova said, "Don't run, fight. And remember, it is not enough to struggle against the things you hate. You have to stand up for something you believe in." A good reminder to all of us who want a better future. We have to fight for something, not just against something. And I want to fight for a world where we use science to solve our problems just like Elena Lagadinova did. A world where state power is wielded by the working class with the intent of helping the working class, and where research and data, not short-term profits, determine the policies put into place. Now that we live in a hyper-connected world where we have the internet and can have instant access to any information we want, a country or even a world that is run scientifically would be easier to pull off than ever. Once we have a socialist worker state, that is. You just have to want it enough and know what it is that you're fighting for. And I'm fighting for a beautiful, logical world where science and data support every large-scale decision that impacts people's lives, and where every person's voice adds something valuable. And I hope you'll join me. Wow, did you just watch an entire video? I hope you liked it. I hope you had a good time, and I hope you learned something new and cool. And if you liked it, then give it a like. And if you hated it and you watched it all the way through, then I guess give it a thumbs down, but I imagine you would have clicked away by now. Oh, and if you liked it, then subscribe to my channel because there's gonna be more videos to come. Oh, and also, I don't know if anyone noticed, but I was peak gremlin hours. Now I'm revolutionary thought. I don't know, I just like it more, so yep. I hope you spend the rest of the day thinking about science now. Or whatever you want. I mean, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Okay, bye!